So the first is George Frederick Knapp, who wrote a book, The State Theory of Money. So what he argued is that we need to look at the role of the state in choosing the money of account and issuing currency in that money of account. This was picked up by John Maynard Keynes. Before he wrote the general theory, he wrote a 2-volume work called The Treatise on Money, 1930. And in that book, he explicitly credited Knapp. But he also, long before that, Knapp wrote in German. It wasn't translated until 1924. But long before this, Keynes was the editor of the most important economics journal, even though he's a very young man at the time, the Economic Journal. He wrote a review of 2 articles published by, written by the Queen's ambassador to Washington, a guy named Mitchell Innes, who wrote a book on imprisonment called Martyrdom in Our Times. He's very opposed to using prison to punish. And beekeeping for the Queen. I guess it was her interest. His only other 2 publications. But he wrote 2 articles on money that were published in a banking law journal. They are the 2 best things ever written on money, in my opinion. Clearer than Knapp. Keynes reviewed the first one, 1913, in the Economic Journal in 1914. He said, "We might quibble with some of the arguments here, but the overall argument seems to me to be correct." And what Innes did was he started off his article saying, here's the story economists tell about money. And it's the very typical one that is still in every textbook, and if any of you took an economics course, you heard this before. You had Robinson Crusoe and Friday, they're on an island, they're bartering fish for coconuts, it's very inconvenient, so they decide to use seashells as a medium of exchange. So that's supposed to be the story of the origins of money. And he says that this is all completely false. Okay, there is no evidence for this, and it's completely illogical. Okay, so instead, he presents a very different story of money that heavily influenced Keynes. In the late teens, 1919, Keynes had a period that he called his Babylonian madness, investigating what they knew at that time about the development of money in Babylonia. Okay? And it is very similar to Knapp's story that it had to have come from the authorities. So Keynes spent this period studying the earliest money units, and he was sort of surprised to find that the earliest money units, all of them that we know about, always were weight units, and they always were grain weight units. So the mina, the shekel, every early money, the pound, the lira, the term always was a weight unit. And so the hypothesis was that these came out of record keeping by the authorities. Okay? And so, anyway, Keynes picks this up and he says, I'm going to quote just very briefly. The state, therefore, comes in, first of all, as the authority of law which enforces the payment of the thing, so this is what I'm saying, the taxes, which corresponds to the name or description in the contracts. But it comes in doubly when, in addition, it claims the right to determine and declare what thing corresponds to the name and to vary its declaration from time to time, when that is to say, it claims the right to re-edit the dictionary. This right is claimed by all modern states and has been so claimed for some 4,000 years at least. So Keynes is pushing the origins of money back 4,000 years at least into the hands of the authorities. Not Robinson Crusoe and Friday. Okay. It did not come out of markets. It wasn't a replacement for inconvenient barter. Okay? It had to do with authorities who want to move resources to themselves. Okay? And our understanding of the origins of money is better today than it was in Keynes's time, because we've had more work by historians and by anthropologists. And if anything, Keynes was too conservative and only pushing it back 4,000 years. It looks like it goes back farther than that. It goes back to before writing. In fact, now the historians of the development of writing think that writing was invented to keep track of money. Okay? All the earliest writing is about debts. And so we're never going to discover the origins of money, because we're not going to find, you know, the record. So right, today I invented money, this is how I did it, and so on, because money already existed before writing. So there is speculation involved in it, but it certainly looks like it came out of the authorities. The best explanation that I know of comes from Grierson, who was the most famous expert on coinage. Coinage, by the way, is not old. Coinage only goes back to about 700 BC. So money existed long before coins. He argued that it probably came out of the tribal practice that in the case of Germany is called Wehrgeld. And that is the payment of fines. So in tribal society, if you injure somebody, you owe the family. And there's enforcement of the payment of the fine. So the hypothesis is that gradually over time, the authorities wanted to get some of that payment of the fine. And so now we say, you pay your debt to society. What does it mean? You pay the government, right? You don't pay the victims anymore, you pay the government. All of this is in Innis. It's part of this is a critique of imprisonment. Anyway, but what does that mean? It means money didn't come out of the market. It came out of the penal system. It came out of punishment. It came out of fees and fines and then taxes. Taxes are punishment. For what? Original sin. You're born guilty. Okay? So what do we always say? You can escape everything except death and taxes. Right? There's a lot more you can say about that. Okay. It's all bound up in religion. Almost all the terms, everything that has to do with money and debt comes out of religion. The first authorities almost certainly were religious authorities that enforced these payments to themselves. So anyway, going back to money. What is it? It's record keeping. Okay. What is that green piece of paper? It's a record. Okay. What are wooden tally sticks, which is the way most kings of Europe spent? They issued a tally stick. Okay. It's record keeping. It is the debt of the issuer. And this is what Innis made very clear. All money is debt. It's the debt of the issuer. Okay? What do they promise you when they issue debt? They promise that you can redeem yourself in payment of that debt back to them. The issuers of debt must take it back. Okay? That is the promise of every issuer of debt. They must take back their own debt in payment. So what is currency? Currency is the debt of the government. The government must take it back in payment to the government. What is a bank deposit? A bank deposit is the debt of your bank. They must take it back in payment of any debts you have to the bank. So you repay your loans with bank debt. So the same is true for all money. What is unique about the state's money is the state can put you into debt. Okay? You owe them taxes. Then they say, oh, here's my IOU. You can use this to pay your debt. Okay? So only the sovereign can put you involuntarily into debt. In all the other cases, you are more or less voluntarily getting into debt. And you can say, but hold it, I really needed that bank loan, right? But there is at least some voluntariness in you choosing to become indebted to the bank. You don't have a choice whether to be indebted to the government. You owe taxes. So the state's money is the state's debt. Coins are the debt of the Treasury. Paper money is the debt of the Fed. And the government has agreed to accept it back in payment to the government itself. Skip over.